Today marks the fourth straight day of rolling blackouts. Households and businesses have been hammered by stage 6 and stage 4 power cuts since Tuesday. Experts are warning that this week's blackouts will have a devastating impact on the country's already stressed economy and deteriorating business and consumer confidence levels. Let's get more analysis with Professor Sampson Mamphweli. Professor, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Now, let's talk first about small businesses. Can we quantify the financial losses suffered by small businesses so far this week?
Good evening to you and the viewers. It's quite difficult because the quantification is not a linear kind of a formula. But what we know and what we've seen is that load shedding has got a huge impact on small businesses, especially because most of these small businesses can't afford alternative energy sources such as your generators and your solar PV and other sources as well. So they get hit hard a lot, and we expect that most of them will be closing shop in the near future.
When you say most of them will be closing shop, that's very alarming. At this stage, is it possible to say accurately how many businesses may have already suffered substantial losses, forcing them to close their doors, and how many, if these power cuts do not end soon, will follow the same fate in the next couple of weeks?
So there's quite a lot. The quantification that we use is the one that is related to the GDP, the impact on the GDP in general. And we have seen from the previous financial years that load shedding has affected about 2% of the GDP, so which basically means that we've lost between 60 billion and 120 billion rands from the economy in 2019 and the same kind of amount around 2020. With the way things are going now, we are expecting that the economy will lose quite a lot more than that. That's why we're projecting that a lot more businesses, especially small businesses, will close shop. But even the big businesses, remember that about 15 to 16% of the GDP contribution is from the manufacturing sector. And the manufacturing sector is heavily dependent on electricity. So we're expecting that about 2 to 3%, and then load shedding just hit me now as I'm talking. But I've got an inverter, it's going to come on just now.
I think we've all learned to be resilient, so I'm going to ask our viewers to bear with us as we watch you sitting in the dark speaking to us about load shedding. Sorry, you were saying.
Yes, so I was saying we're looking at about 2% or to 3% of the manufacturing sector closing shop in the next year or so. So that's the unfortunate part of things. So if you look at the impact of load shedding in monetary terms, in 2020 we were losing about 500 million per stage of load shedding per day. When we look at 2021, we're losing about 700 million per stage per day. As things stand, with stage 4, we're losing about 950 million rand per stage per day. Now, stage 6 has already resulted in us losing close to 5 billion rands from the time Eskom started implementing stage 6 load shedding. So these are quite huge numbers, and that goes with the job losses that will come with the shutdown of some of the manufacturing factories across the country.
So job losses, that's something that South Africans have become accustomed to in the past 2 years of the pandemic. We already have an unacceptably high unemployment rate, and things are looking to get worse with this type of intensive stage 6 load shedding. Can you quantify how many more South Africans are likely to lose their jobs as a direct result of economic pressure brought on by load shedding?
We're looking at anything between 100,000 and 200,000 people who will lose their jobs because of load shedding. And that's a very consecutive kind of a number, because the actual number we can only quantify at the end of the Eskom financial year, which will end around November this year. Eskom themselves have projected that load shedding will be quite worse this year. We haven't seen the worst part of it. It's going to be worse towards September, October, according to their projections. So towards the end of the year, we will know how many people will most likely lose their jobs. And as you rightly indicated, the economy has not been doing very well. It has not been producing those jobs. And the impact financially will also be on the food side of things. It will also be on the petrol side of things. So the entire kind of value chain in the economy gets affected because there's a use of electricity in one way or the other. The other aspect is that at the end of the current financial year, Eskom will have to submit their financials to the National Energy Regulator and do what we call the regulatory clearing account. Basically, they need to submit numbers to show how much money they spend on generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity, as opposed to the tariffs that they got in the previous financial year. So because they are using a lot of diesel to keep the lights on, what will happen is that regulatory clearing account is going to be very high, which basically means that in the next financial year, the public will have to pay a lot more for electricity, so that Eskom can recover the money that they are using at the moment. And that is going to filter down to the consumers. So we can expect a bleak future in terms of the price of goods and services, the food and the petrol as well.
Professor, I want to just break down that number. You said 950 million per hour, correct?
It's about 950 million per stage per day.
Per day, okay.
And that's for stage 4. And if you go to stage 5, that's about 1.5 billion rand that we spend, that we lose per stage per day.
Now, is that including all the ways that load shedding impacts people? For instance, and I just made a list off the top of my head of a couple of things I can think of. So obviously businesses lose revenue. They have to spend more on alternative energy production, fuel for generators, solar panels, that kind of thing. Business lost due to Wi-Fi and cell phone towers being down during load shedding. For ordinary consumers, it's food spoiling, appliances being damaged by constant on and off of load shedding. Things like sitting in load-shedding gridlock and hearing that petrol and the sound of rands ticking over as you sit trying to cross a four-way stop. So there are so many ways that load-shedding impacts South Africans and businesses. Is all of that included in that figure you mentioned?
It's not. This is only the amount that we lose on the side of the production of goods and services. And it's mainly inclined towards the manufacturing sector. So if you look at the various sectors in terms of the goods and services, on the other sectors that you've just mentioned, the actual amount is can go up to, for instance, for stage 6, it could go up to 2 billion rand. So the impact is quite massive. And what we do ourselves, we quantify the impact that impact a GDP directly, which is where we look at the manufacturing sector mainly, the production of goods and services, and the transportation of such goods and services, because that's where you lose a lot of money. But overall, this amount is nowhere near the actual amount that we lose in the production of goods and services.
Well, thank you very much. Our time has unfortunately run out, but we do appreciate your insights, sir. That was Professor Sampson Mamphweli, energy expert.